Hello everyone and welcome back once again to another Adobe Photoshop tutorial. And this is Chase here, and on this tutorial we are going to be taking a look on how to use some luminosity mask using Tony Kuiper's TK Actions panel. Again, it is possible to make luminosity masks manually, but I find that using his action panel is the best way to achieve luminosity masks quickly, effectively, and it is by far my favorite way to edit images on Photoshop. So today we're going to be using this image. This is a five image stitch panorama taking in a Redwood State Park just north of Monterey Bay, and we're going to be making a few adjustments to it, primarily using his action panel to achieve a more glowy, dreamy, and deeper saturation effect in the trees and forests. You can see right now, while it looks pretty good, and before I went into this, I did correct some of the distortion, but overall it's fairly flat. This is the kind of day I wanted to take the light, where it was an overcast day. So there wasn't too much sunlight, just a nice overall UV glow, but I still want to bring down some of the lighter lights and make those a little darker and really bring out the reds and maybe the base of the redwoods here, and make the greens in the image, especially the lighter greens, shine a little bit more overall. So one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to open up the TK Actions panel here. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the TK Actions panel, I would suggest first reading the tutorial or the PDF he sends along with it. That is a great way to learn a little bit more about it from the man that created it. But you can see we have a lot of buttons here. You know, and I usually use the Actions tab, not the basic TP, because this creates a lot of luminosity masks, and I just usually want to create one. And you can see we have lights, darks, midtones, and then we have a range of colors from red all the way down to yellow. He also has his the different layer adjustments here, so curves, levels. Pressing these buttons achieves all the same effects as do these over here. Then we also have a few blending modes. Again, if you watched the last video, you can see a lot of these are the same blending modes I talked about that we mostly will use, from screen, soft light, luminosity, multiply, and overlay. And as you go down, there are other ways to create luminosity masks that are a bit more complicated, such as zone masks or subtracted. Typically, I don't use those that much. I maybe use this middle section here in the gray, blue, and red, probably for maybe about 1 out of 20 of my images. You can find more information about it reading the PDFs, but again, today we're just going to be getting into this top section here, as well as this middle green section. I really like this middle green section as well. It has a lot of great actions that can immediately improve the look of your images. And we're actually going to start by using one of these, and then after that we'll get into talking a little bit more about luminosity masks and how to use those. But when I look at an image like this, a forest image, or even if it's a sunset image at a beach, or maybe if it's like a tiny bear cub or something like that, I like to give those images a little bit more of a dream glow effect. And you can achieve it through this button right here called the Orton Lights. There's a lot of places or ways to create Orton Lights. A lot of videos I used to watch on YouTube, people would give you free actions, but it does come handy with the TK Actions panel. So instead of ever making it manually like I used to years ago, I just click Orton Lights right here, and it's going to process it. And what it will typically do is it will come up with this Gaussian blur panel here. And just for today, we'll leave it at the default here, which is 20 pixels radius. If you go to a higher radius, the blur will spread out more and more, so you'll get more of a blur effect. And if you go a little less, if you just want a little bit less blur effect, crossing over fewer pixels, you can go as low as you want. But again, we will just go to 20. I typically will always do it between 14 up to about 26 or 28 pixels. So we'll click OK. And what the Orton effects are going to do is that they're going to give a nice Gaussian blur to a lot of our lights. So it's going to focus mostly on the lights in our image, the brighter areas, and try to blur them while making them just a little bit softer. It's going to make it a little bit softer light. So it is going to keep them still light. So maybe if we zoom in, you can see a little bit of effect. So we're already getting that dream glow effect I can talk about. So if you can see here, I'm going to turn off the Orton Lights, and you can see it's kind of very flat. The image is just a little bit more sharp, and when I turn it back on, you can see everything kind of becomes a little bit more hazy, a little more dreamy, but it evens out the color and tonal range overall. Now, I typically don't leave my Orton Lights at 100% A lot of times I may bring this down to maybe about 65% or so. That looks pretty good. And you can see when I created Orton lights, it created a smart layer here. It created actually a whole bunch of layers. This is smart object, but it put them all in this group. So I can just close this group overall, and it's nice and compact inside that group. You could see it created a layer mask here where the effect of Orton lights are being applied. Now, one thing you could do with this, so I like the effect overall, but if you are using Orton lights, you can see it's in this group. What you could do is, if you wanted to adjust where the effect was taking place, is you could create another group. So I'm going to press the group folder down here. I'm going to call this one Orton lights. I'm just going to call it Orton there, and I'm going to put this group in this folder. So now it's all in this folder here, this Orton folder. And by putting a layer mask here, I'm putting a layer mask over everything that's in this folder here, which is all this stuff. So it's pretty much the global layer mask. And let's say I didn't like the Orton effect maybe on, for example, just the path. So I can, with my white layer mask, I can take my black brush, maybe let's just say 50%, and I can just kind of paint through the pathway here and eliminate some of that Orton effect. Again, I do like the Orton effect through most of this image, so I'm not going to get rid of it too much, but that is what you would do, is that you would put that group inside another group and then put a layer mask on side of that folder to then paint away where you don't want the Orton effect. So again, alright, if you can see, our image has already taken on a lot better look from just applying that Orton effect. You can see the leaves up here in the area where it's most bright and the sun's coming through. It becomes a lot more blurred together. The color, it really brings out the greens and the lights, and again gives it, as I call it, that overall dreamy look that I really like. So that Orton button effect is a really useful tool, and we'll use a couple more tools in here. If you watched the last video, this button right here, the B and D layers, this is a simpler way to make those burn and dodge layers that I talked about. So if you ever wanted to make those, you could just click that burn and dodge layers. But the purpose of this video is to talk about luminosity masks. So up here we have our luminosity masks, and the three I generally focus on the most are my lights, my darks, and my midtones. So how the lights luminosity masks work, or what a luminosity mask is in the first place, is it pretty much selects a tonal range in the image and allows you to focus just on that specific tonal range. So for example, if I select my lights 1, it's going to be affecting the brightest areas of my image. It's going to be affecting, let's say, a wider area of the light. So let me show you an example using a grayscale image here. So if I select lights 1, you can see when I select lights 1, it's selecting the brightest whites, and it's fading off a little bit more as it gets toward the black. You can see these marching ants here show you a good representation. But if you want to see a better representation of what's doing, when you click a luminosity mask button, click this view up here. When you click this view, you're going to get a red mask showing you. So we're going to move that side here, and well, hold on. Let me close this 1 second. Hold on. View. I want to press view. Continue. Oh, I'm doing it wrong again. All right. Here we go. All right, now I'll get it. So I'm going to press view, and what I'm going to do is I'm showing you that the dark red, it's darkest, the most pixels are selected on the brightest parts of the lights, and those pixels slowly fade away as they get toward the darks here. It's kind of hard to show you because every time I press continue it goes away, but you may be getting what I'm getting at here. So again, if you click it again, you can see it's darkest on the right where the brights are, and it fades slowly over to the left where no pixels are selected in the darks. So let's say we do the opposite. Let's say we select dark ones. So what do you think will happen? Well, what's going to happen is it's going to select the darkest of the darks here, and it's going to do the opposite of the whites. It's going to slowly fade away as it gets toward the light. So let's click darks 1, and you can see now we have our darkest dark selected, and it's fading away toward the bright. So if we click view again, you can see we have our darkest pixels here over on the far left. Maybe these are selected around 100%, and then it's 90, 80, 70%, 60, all the way down to 0% on the lightest lights. So this is a great way to work with certain tonal values, and it's very, you could say, fluid. It's very soft to transition. So you get great transitions using luminosity masks because it's affecting it based on the tonal range and the amount of light. So that's how these luminosity masks work. A great way, one of the best ways for me to learn how the buttons worked was to pull up a grayscale image like this. This just comes off Google. I just typed in grayscale. and you can pull up a grayscale image like this. Now, what you can see as well before we go back to the images, we each selected lights 1 and darks 1. If I wanted to select maybe a smaller range of darks, more refined dark, I don't want to, maybe let's say I don't want any of this. I don't want to affect any of the midtones, even a little bit. I could select the opposite end of the darks, darks number 5. Now what it's going to do is it's going to be selected just to this very left side here. So let's take a look. It's darks 5, and you can see the marching ants have been refined. It's just the darkest darks, and if I click view, you can see the red pixels fade out almost immediately. By the time you're getting into those darker midtones, there's no red pixel selected. So the only thing you would be working on in your image is just what these red pixels are selected. So if I were to, let's say, brighten it up quite a bit, it would become brightest here in the darkest red, and that brightness effect would slowly fade away as the red pixels fade away. So again, the best way to understand this will be obviously through examples that we're going to show you here, but to just practice. It took me maybe a few days to learn, but once I got the hang of it, I've never looked back. So we'll go back to our main image here, and let's start by selecting our lightest lights. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with lights 1, and let's see what pixels that selects. So I'm going to press lights 1 here, and you can see a lot of marching ants. It's selecting a lot of the image, so I can already tell this probably isn't going to work, but we'll click view anyway. Click view. And as you can see, we have a lot of red selected. We have the path is in red, we have different parts of the leaves, the sky is really dark red there. You can see the darkest parts of the image from the branches and parts of the railing are not. So again, everything that does not have red pixels will not be affected by your adjustment. So I'm going to press continue. And by the way, when this comes up, when you click view, never press stop. You can, but it usually takes about an additional 30 seconds to kind of have to press OK to everything to go back to normal. So just always make sure you press continue. So maybe I'm going to want to select lights 3. Let's see if that's a little better here. Alright, so lights 3 actually really refines to just the sky and some parts of the leaves, so it's a little too extreme. So I'm actually going to go with lights 2, which I think should be perfect. Yes, that's good. Just a little bit on the path. It's really selecting all the leaves that are lighter that I want to work on, so I'm going to press continue. Now what I'm going to do is I want to bring the lights down. So I can go about this 2 ways. I can either select one of the adjustment layers off of here I want to work with, and if we're bringing lights down, we may either want to work with curves or levels. But I can also go over here to my normal adjustment panel, and I can select brightness, contrast, levels, curves, or exposure. Now again, I normally work with levels, so I'm going to click levels here. And what we're going to do is we're going to pull the mid-tones down. And you can see really quick before I go any further, when I click levels, it used the selection we had up from the luminosity mask. You can see our layer mask is not a solid white. See, if I just click levels alone, it's solid white. It selects the whole image. But when I had his luminosity mask selected, it only is going to be working on the areas that were selected in that luminosity mask, if that makes sense. You can see the darkest parts here in this little tiny mask are the parts of the trees and branches and railing that were not selected. So we're going to get rid of this levels mask. Now, as you can see here, we're going to pull down the midtones, and again, it's only affecting the brightest spots. So all your darkest darks are not going to be affected. So we're going to pull this down maybe to about 0.76. Bring the blacks down a little bit, maybe about 10. Bring the brights up just to apply a little bit more contrast, maybe just about 248. And we'll pull the whites up here, the overall whites up a little bit, because again, we want it to be a little darker. So what I just did again is you can see the difference. There's the photo without the effect, and here's it with the new adjustments. You can see it's just working on the lightest lights. It's not affecting anything on these dark redwoods here or the darkest parts of the image. It's just working on the lightest lights. So again, that looks pretty good. That's a fairly good start. So let's keep going. So let's maybe now, let's just work on some greens. Now, even though you have green select here, a lot of times I find that greens such as this tend to be more grouped in the yellow category here, yellow luminosity mask. So he gives you a lot of good colors here that you can select from. If I were to select reds, which I can show you here, it's probably going to select a lot of the redwood trees. Yeah, a little bit of the redwood trees are selected. It's still showing a lot of red pixels coming from the sky here. That's not really what I want, so we're going to pick yellow 2. And let's see, oh, that's selecting a large part of the image. But it is really working on a lot of those greens. It is working on a lot of those greens, but maybe a little too much. So I'm going to try yellow 3, see if that's a little better. Should be a little less. Yeah, a little more confined to just the leaves and areas I want it. So I'm going to press continue. And what I'm going to do here is I'm also going to go back over to my adjustment panel, but I'm going to select color balance for this one. Because again, I want to work on those greens and yellows I selected. So I'm going to pull the greens up a bit, maybe make the forest look really nice and vibrant and green, and maybe just pull the yellows down just about -2. So you can see before we had kind of a more reddish tinted image, and now we have a really nice vibrant green. And again, this is all just preference. You may be, oh, I don't like that, or maybe I just want the opacity, maybe I just want it to be 80% of what I did. But immediately what I don't like is, I don't like that it took some of those yellow pixels and put them on the trees. So this technique where I'm about to show you is called masking the mask. So what I'm going to do is, if I wanted to paint out using layer mask like I've shown you, get rid of the effect on the trees, it wouldn't work, because adding another vector mask won't affect this layer mask. So what I have to do is, again, we have to mask the mask. So I'm going to create a group, and I'm going to put this new layer, I'm going to drag it into the group. And you can just close it if you want, or you can keep it open as visual, whatever helps you. But I'm going to close it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a layer on this group here, a white layer. Now when I'm painting in this layer, just like we did with the Orton lights, it is affecting this layer mask. So I'm pretty much I'm only affecting the areas of the image that were already affected using the layer mask, and I'm getting rid of them where I don't want them. So for example, I like the redwoods being a bit more red, so I have my black brush selected. I'll start by going at opacity of 75%, and I'm just going to paint over the redwoods to bring back some of that red color that I liked, because it is a nice contrast to have some of the red and some of the green in this forest here. So I'm just going to paint through some of these redwoods, really bring back some of that red. I may be painting over a little bit of the greens, but overall you probably won't notice it too much. So again, and then also the path. I don't want the path to be very green tint nor the railing, so I'm just going to paint through the path a little bit more and bring back some of those red and orange hues that we started with. Now again, you can see the layer here being painted, and again, as I'm painting this layer, it's only affecting the pixels that were selected using this layer mask. You can see if I press the eyeball here, there's the image before we selected our yellows and changed it to a bit more green hue, and there it's after. So you can see the trees are not changing because I went back and I concealed those pixels using the black brush. And matter of fact, I want to paint a little bit more on the ground here. I liked that red, so I want to bring back more of that red on the ground. And just bring it back a little bit piece by piece, just here, just to get a little color so it's not green overall. So there, that looks pretty good. But I even want the trees to be a bit more red. So what I can do is I can find any luminosity mask I want that I think will select the trees. Again, it looked like when I selected red, it looked like it was picking up some red pixels somewhere else. I'm going to try that again on reds 3 and see if it'll just select the trees here. Didn't really seem to be wanting to do them before. Yeah, it's not seeing the trees as red. It's probably seeing them more as a yellow hue. I think it's seeing the whole image as a yellow hue. So it's not going to work there, but I'm sure I could find a layer mask that will. So maybe if I go back, these trees look like they are fairly, they're not bright and they're not super dark, so they should fit inside my midtones. So I'm going to just go right to the middle of midtones 3. I'm going to press 3 here. Let's see view. So now that's selecting a lot there. So I want to maybe try one more. Let's try midtones 5. See if I can just get areas on the tree that I want. Oh, I went the other way. I meant to go to midtones 1. Get a few less midtones. Let's see. That's a little too much. So I'm actually just going to do midtones 2 here. And while it's selecting a lot of the green, it is getting parts of the trees I want, at least over here. So, well, yeah, I'm going to try this first, and if not, we'll try something else. I'm going to go back to color balance here, and I'm going to bring the reds up a little bit, maybe about to 18. I'm going to bring down the purples a little bit, and just the yellows as well. And I think that looks pretty good for what I want the trees to look like. And again, I'm going to mask the mask, so I'm going to click the group here. I'm going to pull this layer into the group, and then I'm going to put a layer mask over the group. Now, last time we were masking out kind of what you could say was a minority part of the image. It wasn't the majority of the image. This time though, instead of masking out all the green, I'm just going to make this background black, And you can see now the entire effect went away. So see when I do the eye, when I click the eye, there's no effect at all. And I'm going to paint in where I want the effect over that mask. So again, I'm going to take my white brush now because I'm on a black background. I'm going to paint back the red in areas I want. So I'm going to come back here. I'm going to keep painting through these areas here along the trees where I want it, and then maybe along the path as well. I'm just going to keep painting this red back into the areas image I want the red to show a little bit more. So there, that looks pretty good. So I click the eye, you can see there's the image before when it was a lot more of a green tint, and here's the image now. So again, the red off those trees is really coming out nicely here. So this image is looking pretty good so far. What I may want to do is I still think this area appears a little bright, so I'm going to go back to my luminosity mask. And I'm going to select a higher lights value so it just really focuses on these brights. Maybe let's try 4. And I'm going to press View. And that is selecting just the areas I want. You can see the lighter red pixels just getting those leaves. But it doesn't look like it's getting enough. I want it to filter off a little more into the brighter leaves. So I'm actually going to go to Lights 3. Let's see how that works. Alright, that looks pretty good. A little more red pixels in the brighter areas. That should look nice because again, the effect is going to have, the effect's going to transfer through more to the areas where there's darker reds, and it's going to filter off more where the reds are lighter, and it's not going to affect anything at all that's gray or white. So I'm going to go back here to levels, and I'm just going to pull our levels down. Now another thing you can do that we haven't talked about is on top of this, if you want a little extra boost, is if you can change your blending mode to the darker ones. Again, all these categories here from darken to darker color, these are the darkening blending modes. And again, the one most people use is multiply. So we're going to press multiply here, and you can see it already got darker before I even change the levels. Notice how much darker it's already getting, and that's already doing a pretty good job. But again, I want to bring a little more contrast in there, so I'm going to bring the midtones down a little bit. I'm going to bring the blacks down a little bit as well. I'm going to pull the whites up just a tad to bring back a little more of that contrast. So there, that's pretty good. You can see if I zoom in here a little bit more, we can see it. There it is before, and there it is after. So it's really just evening out the lights across this image here. Now, that does look pretty good so far, but what we're losing is we're losing some of the contrast. So I want to bring some of the contrast in back to darker parts of the image. So I'm going to click the TK Actions panel, and I'm just going to select right in the middle here, Darks 3. So let's see what that looks like. So that's really selecting the trees here. probably what I could have gone with when I was trying to paint the trees red in the first place. But a lot of times you just gotta practice with it and find out what works best. But that does look pretty good. So I'm going to click Continue, and I'm going to change the blending mode to Soft Light, and I'm going to select. Let's see. I'm going to use the curves adjustment here. Oh, we didn't actually change the blending mode there. I'm going to change it to Soft Light. And already by doing Soft Light, you can see, without even having to touch the curves panel, we're getting a lot more contrast in this image here. Because again, this section of blending modes here from overlay to hard mix affects the contrast. And again, we usually will only use overlay and Soft Light. That does look pretty good. I don't want it to be that contrasty, so I'm going to bring the brights up. I'm actually going to bring the brights up a little bit more. I'm actually going to do it. No, I'm actually going to bring them down just a little bit. I'm going to bring the darks up a little bit too. So, common rule in Photoshop is when you have an S curve, that creates a little bit more contrast, and on the curves line, and I'm going to bring the opacity down a little bit because I don't want the effect to be 100%, so I'm going to bring it down to maybe about 50. I want 50% of that effect. And that looks nice. It's, again, if you look at these trees especially, you can see it's bringing back just a little bit more of that contrast. So it's giving it a little bit more pop that I want, really bringing out the darks. So right now, our image is looking pretty good. So normally I would go through and maybe make a few more fine-tuned adjustments. For the sake of keeping this video short and not going on for 1 to 2 hours, I'm going to show you one more thing I do. Again, as I told you, you can click the B and D layers if you want to make burn and dodge layers without having to do it manually. It makes the exact same things as we talked about in the last video. But another button I really like to use here is the Make It Glow button. The Make It Glow button takes a lot of the brighter parts of the image, and it not only produces more vibrance and saturation, but it spreads that saturation and vibrance using a blur throughout the image. So I really like the effect it has, so I'm going to click it. And again, just with like Orton lights, it will pop up with a little window here asking you to choose how many pixels you like to have it. The higher you bring the pixels, the less effect you're going to see overall, and the lower you bring the pixels, it's going to be more confined to just the areas where it's spreading out from. So again, just for the sake of this video, we'll leave it at default, which is, I normally go for the default. I'd say the lowest I've ever gone is about 20, and I have gone up to about 40 or 45. And I'll click OK, and it's going to have to take effect. And again, just like the Orton layer lights, it's going to create a smart object here. And again, this is a little too much. I've never left the Smart Glow at 100%. I usually like to tone it down a bit, but just notice the difference while it is 100%. So there's the image without the Smart Glow, and there it is with. You can see it's adding a lot of saturation and pop in just the brightest parts of the images, and it's really making the certain color, the tonal values we have come back to life. So I'm going to bring this down actually to maybe about 45% or so. I just want it to be a little bit of an effect. Let's see, let's zoom in there, see how that looks here. So that looks pretty good. You can see it's really bringing out those reds, really just making a nice soft red, and it's making all the shades of green pop really, really nice. It's just kind of mending them together, making them look really good. So yeah, so that image looks pretty good. And again, let's see, if we get rid of all these eyes here, you can see this is what we started with at the beginning, a very flat, kind of greenish tint image. And we've gone all the way, step by step, just using a few luminosity masks, to this. A lot more of a dreamy, beautiful looking forest scene that really makes you feel like you're in a fairy tale. So again, that's just a small introduction to the luminosity mask. I definitely recommend getting these. The possibilities are limitless. You know, as you begin to use luminosity masks, I would suggest starting off by just using the creative masking panel up here. You can see it writes out his little order of choose your selection, choose your layer, and then choose your blending mode. So it is a great way to start using the green area down here. The miscellaneous also has a lot of nice action buttons. And then of course, if you are posting it on the web, let's for the example of this video, since we went through sharpening last one, let's say I wanted to post on the web, I could select the 1920 pixel one here, so that will mean it'll make the width of the image 1920 pixels, which is proper for web sharpening, and it'll run through a process and create a small image file that is ready for the web. And then I could have an image that's already pre-sharpened that I don't have to touch, that I could post on Facebook or Instagram or any other sort of web platform. So again, that's how you use the luminosity masks. They are a fantastic tool, and have fun with them.